Welcome to this Easy 11 Plus short lesson on written comprehension questions that ask you to explain the effect of a word. As always, the worksheet for today's lesson is linked in the video description along with lots of other links which you may find useful, so I recommend that you take a bit of time to explore those. If you find this lesson useful, please remember to like, subscribe and click the bell button. Don't forget to look at the other videos and the Easy 11 Plus channel, and remember that my live lessons are every Tuesday evening at 6 o'clock. Right, let's get started. So the text for today's lesson is here, and if you haven't read it yet, I strongly recommend that you print out today's worksheet and give it a read before you watch the rest of this lesson, and perhaps also try the questions for yourself. Now, when we're talking about the effect of a thing, we're thinking about the influence that it has on something else. If I pull my head in quickly, you see that the camera refocuses. So me moving my head has the effect of causing the camera to adjust its own settings. Now, if you're thinking about words in a piece of writing, the effect that they have is on the reader. A word can make a reader think something interesting, or it can make them feel something, or both. It depends on the word and on the context. Let's have a look at the questions. So the first question here is asking us to look at the effect of the word parade in line 1. And we can see that there are 2 marks available here, which tells us that a relatively simple answer will be acceptable, but that it does need a bit more than just a single quick point. Let's have a look at this word in the text. So if we come down to line 1 here, we can see that in the newspaper office where I worked was a constant parade of adventurers. And let's read on a bit for the context. Talented press agents, promoters, moguls of mining and prospectors who, having struck it rich, now lived grandly in palatial homes, luxurious hotels or impressive clubs. Okay, so all kinds of people, very wealthy people living extravagant lives. But these are described as adventurers, and they appear in a constant parade. So what does this word mean? Well, let's start with the basics. If there's a parade of them, it means that there are many of these people, put simply. And that's an important point. It's something that this word makes us think, and it's worth writing down, and it's probably worth a mark. But there's more to this, because why has the writer not just written, there were many of them? What does a parade suggest? What's the difference between a parade of people and a mob of people, for example? Well, in a parade, people move rather neatly, one after the other, and they're usually dressed up, looking grand or extravagant. So we've got several ideas here. We've got the idea that there are many people, we've got the idea that they come one after another rather than all together, and we've got the idea that there's something rather magnificent about them. And those ideas together should be plenty for our 2 marks. Now you'll notice that these are all thoughts that we have about this situation, about this word. These aren't really emotional impressions. Sometimes effects, as I mentioned, will be more intellectual, they'll more be about the ideas that are created. Sometimes they'll be more about the feelings that are created. I think in this case there aren't any particularly strong feelings for us to talk about. So let's have a go at writing an answer based on what I've just said. First of all, that there are many of them. Okay, so that's our first point, and that's definitely going to be worth some credit. Now the next thing we mentioned is that they came in sequence. Arriving in succession. I haven't said one after another because a parade could also see people coming in groups and so on. I don't think it really matters for the marks, but we may as well be precise. There were many of these people arriving in succession, and they looked impressive as though dressed up for a procession. Now you'll notice that I haven't used all the answer space, and trying to fill the answer space is often good exam advice, but it's abundantly clear that we've done what we need to do to get 2 marks here, and possibly to deserve more marks than are actually available. Let's have a look at the next one, part B. This asks us about the word scars in line 12. Let's have a look at that. So this says there were no roads, only makeshift trails left by the wagons that had hauled borax in the 80s. Now they were little more than twisting scars through brush, over dry washes and dunes, though listed on the maps as roads. Okay, so these are things that are called roads, but in fact they appear to the author just to be barely more than twisting scars. So what does this mean? What is a scar? Well, a scar is what's left on your skin after a wound of some kind has healed. So it shows you where the wound was, but it's much fainter and less obvious, but it's also likely to look quite rough and ugly. And those ideas together tell us an enormous amount about these roads. So let's have a go at writing that out. So this is the first part of what I suggested, that the roads aren't really visible anymore, apart from a faint remnant, like wounds that have healed. And it's really important to say that last bit to show that you understand how the idea of a physical scar on a body relates to what's going on here. Just show that you clearly understand what's meant by the word scar and how it might relate to what we're talking about. Now, the other part of what we discussed was the idea that scars are quite rough and ugly looking. I think we can say exactly that. And that's our answer. The old roads are barely visible anymore, like healed wounds. Like scars, they are rough and ugly, although faint. And there's plenty in there for 3 marks. That shows really full understanding. Again, I think that this word is trying to conjure a clear image of the roads, rather than particularly trying to evoke any very strong emotion. You could say that this suggests a kind of sense of the loneliness of the landscape, perhaps, but I think that's stretching it a bit beyond what we get from this particular word. By the way, speaking of scars, I don't know if you can see, I've got a little bit of a gap in my eyebrow here, where something when I was a very small child left a scar there, and I've no idea what that was. On to the next one. Items in line 21. Well, that's a very surprising looking word. Let's go into the text and see what effects that could possibly be creating. This refers to these items, so we need to know what these means. Let's go back a bit to line 18. At the last outpost of civilization, a 2-cabin resort, the sign over a sandblasted, false-fronted building stressed, "Free information, cabins, eats, gas, oil, refreshments." Needing all these items, I parked my car and walked into a foretaste of things to come. If we're going to explain the word items, we really need to think about what these items actually are. Let's look at the list again. Free information, cabins, eats, gas, oil, refreshments. Now, almost all of these really are items. Cabins, eats, that means food, gas, oil, refreshments. All of these are items of one kind or another. But free information really isn't an item. And so I think that's where we need to look to understand why this word might be of interest and why it might be particularly likely to encourage certain thoughts in the reader. And that's often a useful thing when you're trying to understand a text. Think about the things that are not absolutely what you might expect, because they will often give you a lot to talk about. So what can we say about the odd word out here? Information. So all these other things here are absolute essentials. You would not want to go into one of the hottest and most barren places on Earth without having had somewhere to sleep in a cabin, but also without food, without fuel and oil for your vehicle, and without drinks. I suppose eats and refreshments are probably different. I reckon refreshments probably covers things to drink. Information is also in that list. And so I think what this is doing, it's saying that information in this context is just as much an item as all these absolutely essential things, insofar as it is just as important for your survival. Knowing where to go, what to do for your safety, and so on, is just as valuable as having a good stash of food and drink. And this is only a 2-mark question, So that's likely to be adequate if well explained. So let's do that. So notice how I've gone straight in here just by making a simple statement which doesn't in itself answer the question, but which demonstrates that I absolutely understand what's going on, that information is the odd one out. And now I'm going to talk about that fact. Now in this case, I've actually used the answer space very fully. Even though it's only a 2-mark answer and the point I'm making is relatively simple, it just takes a bit more room for a full explanation. So information isn't really an item. Notice I am using really short quotations in the body of my sentences, so that my evidence and my explanation are together, rather than my having to do one, then the other, and take up much more space and time. And I've done this again with the word gas, it's in quotation marks, and for example with the word food, which isn't in quotation marks because it's my gloss of the word eats in the passage. By using this word to describe it in the same way as food or gas, the author reminds us that local knowledge is just as important for survival in Death Valley. Notice also that I've said local knowledge here rather than repeating the word information to indicate my understanding of what the word information actually in practice means here. And that's it. This is a really full explanation. You'll notice that the phrase reminds us as well actually is an important part of me showing that I'm talking about effects, because how is it making the reader think certain things, and reminds us makes it clear that I'm myself thinking in that way. I hope that was useful. Of course, there's another category of effects questions which are to do with emotional effects, things like shock, sadness, surprise, suspense, and so on. And I'll do another video at some stage in which I look at questions exploring that kind of effect. In the meantime, I hope this was useful. Please remember to like the video, subscribe, and click the bell button. And I hope to see you next Tuesday at 6 o'clock for my next Easy 11 Plus live lesson. In the meantime, don't forget to explore my channel and don't forget to look at some of the links in the video description down below. Bye bye.